Hi, this is Natalie Lander, voice of Kinsey, Tara Branford, Stargirl, and many others. You are listening to a W2Mnet podcast. You can visit W2Mnet.com for other podcasts about entertainment, video games, sports, and wrestling.
And good evening. Well, I guess this is technically whenever the fuck you listen to this. And welcome to the newest installment of the Black Irish Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Teasley. With me, as always, the token black guy of the W2M network, Mr. Erik Watkins.
Oh, sure. Gonna be a slow news week, they said. We're in the doldrums of the year, they said. Fun.
I don't think this was a slow news week. I mean, it's like I'm pretty sure almost every day we had something breaking for us to talk about, and I mean we don't really have much to allude to. So whenever you're ready, we can get right into this because I have a feeling that this is going to be one hell of a ride to, this week. And if we pissed YouTube off couple of weeks ago, yeah, I'm pretty sure we might piss them off again this week.
Yeah. Everything that I say about algorithms is proving true, and personally, I wouldn't be surprised if we fuck with them again this time around, because I didn't even get to share the update that I wanted to before we got started. Oh, Jeebus.
Yeah, and with that being said, we're diving headfirst into the news. We had two separate stories that can be we learned how to combine them and bundle them under one topic of free money to everyone. Well, almost everyone. And we're going to be discussing, we're coming in hot on this one, discussing the new bill that passed in Oakland, California and Evanston, Illinois, wasn't it?
Yep, Evanston, Illinois.
With that being said, one is if you're a low income family earning below the median poverty line, you will be able to receive funding as long as you're not white. And the other one is a story that's been in and out of the news for quite some time, and that is the Evanston story of where they was the first place to pass giving reparations to African American families. So we've kind of had a little discussion of this offline. So Erik, I'm going to give you the floor and get your take on everything I'll encompass into one.
All right. With the whole situation starting in Evanston first, I have said in the past, I don't think we as a whole are really ready for reparations on a grand scale. While ideally I would have liked to have seen somebody test the waters, as you can see, they're already getting into hiccups because one of the main arguments for Evanston is this isn't money directly into people's pockets. It is basically a certain amount of funds, I believe like $25,000, for you to help own and get a house. With the whole issues of home ownership in general in this country, and given everything in the economy, plus certain biases that do exist in home ownership, there was a story locally in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from my house where you had the interracial couple with the dramatically different appraisals. I approve of that in some ways. I get kind of where they're coming from. But the argument is, why not just give money to people's pockets? While, as we've seen from the now 3 recent stimulus checks, that can be a good thing. But that's also very tricky because when you're talking about this, there's a lot of work that has to be done to make sure it's effective and it holds on to the means of what you're trying to do. Going over to Oakland, There's a lot of people struggling in Oakland right now, of all races, colors, and creeds. I get that. While you're trying to do the right thing prima facie in helping those lower income families of color, because yes, historically they have not been able to get the same job opportunities as low income or others who of white people. There's a whole bunch of statistics I can throw to in that regard. You're opening a very strange door, because in a place like Oakland, and really the entire Bay Area of California, you've seen a big exodus because everyone is being more and more priced out, in large part because of the tech companies coming in, hiring people, and the rent and home prices skyrocketing. So how are you going to encourage and help some people who need it, some who you could easily argue that need it more, but also leave others who could also benefit out in the cold? This is one of those things that, okay, I get, but I don't fully get. Doesn't sound like either place is 100% going about it the right way. Great intentions, execution's iffy.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll agree on some of those points, disagree on some, and we'll get into that discussion shortly. Um, the thing is, I think it's a slippery slope. You're setting a precedent of racism. I mean, because you're setting a precedent of someone can receive certain benefits due to the color of their skin. I mean, that's the very definition of racism. If this was flipped around, you'd have people marching in the streets. It'd be all over every local news station. It wouldn't just be a blip. And that's the concern I have and the issue I have with it, because being able to doctorate a funding based on the color of your skin is really, really not right. I understand people struggle. I mean, I didn't grow up in the most lavish lifestyle. My current lifestyle is 10 times better than what I grew up with. Um, and, I know that struggle, but so does a lot of other families. And I think that any family struggling should be able to get assistance, not just, you should not pick and choose what funding you're going to give. And I think it goes across the board. I don't care what color you are, what your sexual preference is, whatever. And you're seeing a lot of contradictions when this becomes uh, in the discussion. You see, well, you got this, and this. Okay, well, if you're combating racism, you don't combat racism with more racism. That's how you divide people, and I think that's what the government is trying to do. I mean, uh, the scariest thing for anything is an educated mind. We've talked about this before, and also a cohesive nation. So as long as they can uh, divide people and play off of that due to social class, race, ethnicity, and sexual preference, they're going to keep people divided. Um, that because a united front is the scariest thing the government can see. Because once a group unites, the government really has no power. Um, and I'm not going to get real political on this, but that's the problem. Because if you can sway a certain group toward your beliefs, and make them think that your beliefs are the only right beliefs and divide that group. It's just like building a house. If you put your strongest part of the home is a load beam. It carries the home.
Mm-hmm.
If you can weaken that load beam, you can bring the entire house down.
Absolutely.
And I think that stuff like this sets a precedent. Now, as far as reparations go, I'm totally against it because slavery is bad. Yes, everybody. I don't think. Well, I don't think I've ever met anybody that has agreed with slavery. But also, you got to look. This nation was founded on the hard work of African Americans. I mean, that's a given. Also, you got to look who else was indentured slaves in the northeastern part of the United States, and that's the Irish, which, ironically, this comes from.
Oh yeah. I mean, you had the
So,
Irish, you had black people, Native Americans, even the Chinese when it comes to railroad slaves in a lot of
yeah,
different forms, and indentured servants have come from a lot of walks of life. No denial.
exactly.
It's historical
So,
fact.
so how can you give reparations to one and exclude the others? Again, slippery slope. You know,
Okay, I
go
can
ahead.
slightly counter that argument with an already governmental precedent that has happened. Look at the Japanese, and they're getting the reparations from those who were in internment camps during World War II. So something like this has been done before.
Okay, this is my issue. World War II. Do you still see people? Are there still living members of society that fought in World War II?
Very few. They're unfortunately steadily dying out.
But when this passed, there was
Yeah, because
a living
this
descendants.
this happened, I want to say 1991.
Okay,
1991.
okay. When did slavery happen?
You can go back to the first ships coming in 1619, but realistically, through the Middle Passage, it was set up in the origins of it were at the beginning of the 16th century.
Okay, so America was founded over 200 years ago. So you're
1776. Mm-hmm.
so is there any living slaves?
No.
Okay, so there's a difference. None of the issues that not taking anything away from anything that they went through, but they with the Japanese illustration that you brought up, you seen direct correlations. You seen people that were still alive that went through that.
Mm-hmm.
In 1991, there was not a slave that was owned alive. So,
Correct.
so you think slavery was ended by Lincoln in a when was the Emancipation Proclamation?
1865, and technically it wasn't necessarily
To the
ended. The
to the
text
13th
itself in
Amendment.
the Emancipation Proclamation said that slavery would not be allowed to expand beyond where it was. Then it was a couple decades later, during Reconstruction, where you saw slavery as it was at
With the
that time
yeah,
finally
I think
end.
yeah, I think it was the 13th Amendment added that totally did away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln freed the slaves. 13th Amendment prevented it going forward. So you're talking about early 1800s. So hypothetically, you would have seen life expectancy was 65, 70. Would you say that would be
Mm, a
back
little
then?
shorter back then. A little shorter back then.
So let's go on the high side, say 60. Let's go on the high
Okay.
side of 60. So you're saying that money owed, you're handing out free money to people that were never affected by slavery. That
Not that.
their lifestyle never was changed by an ancestor being a slave.
And that's a tough argument because you can look at certain individuals and say, yes, their lifestyle was never affected. But then at the same time, it's like, just like how you would be able to quantify the money, how can you necessarily quantify that their lifestyle wasn't affected? And that's why I say we're not ready, because these are main things that would have to be discussed in some form. Yes, do you see certain correlations in certain groups and what's going on? Yes, we're talking generational wealth, things like redlining and all of that. Can you put those back to slavery? Not necessarily. You put those back to the Jim Crow era, which was really 2 generations after slavery, alongside polling taxes, certain things like that. So, is there some sort of effect? Yes. But can you say, oh, direct causation and correlation? No. The waters do get way too muddy.
Exactly. And just like me and you talked, I mean, you would have to, every person in America should be eligible, because there was a lot of biracial couples that
Oh,
that
yes.
reside. There was a lot of children born out of biracial couples from slavery. Uh,
Absolutely.
Not under the best circumstances or the most ethical circumstances, but I mean, you touch on a lot of things there. So anybody with a descent that's a descendant of a slave should be qualified for to any kind of reparations. That's where I say the slippery slope happens, because
Mm-hmm.
that's opening up, because you're going to see a lot of people coming out saying that, just like I'm playing devil's advocate, and just for the discussion purposes, I keep personal feelings off the show for the most part. Sometimes I give my personal opinion, but like stuff like this, Eric, you know where I stand. I know where you stand, and for the sake of discussion, we take different sides. That's what this show's about.
Mm-hmm. Of
But
course.
because we've been bitched at because we agreed on a lot of too many things before. But I
Yes,
see
we do
this.
pay attention to feedback here on Black Irish.
So I mean, the the issue with it is, where do you draw the line? Who qualifies? Who doesn't qualify? And you're just setting the precedent for more racial division. And uh, I'm going to go ahead and say it. You're setting the precedent to weaken the economic system, as well as the financial constraints, because you're now going to see people getting free money, just like they're doing, for doing nothing. Uh, and I see that that's the problem. You're seeing small businesses shut down. Uh, you're seeing small businesses looted and tore down, and neighborhoods being overran with violence. And you know, this is something for a future discussion. You're seeing
Yeah, there
basically,
there is something that came up that I wanted to get into on a future episode
you're
in those
seeing,
regards.
yeah, you're seeing citizens taking martial law, but it's only a certain areas that you're seeing this in, and that's the problem. Because if everybody starts doing that, if you see citizens start um, dictating how certain cities are going to be able to be accessed, you're going to see the downfall of everything in America.
And in a lot of ways, yes. And knowing someone who is an anarchist, having a lot of conversations and their takes on them, they even recognize to a point that there are some limits. Because if you look at what some anarchists believe, it's everything total. There's no government on any level whatsoever. But then you have others that believe that limited levels of state government would be acceptable, just as long as you don't have a federal government, which, if you look at the history in our country, that's where basically our founding was. You had a lot of states with a lot of the power, and then the federal government was more like a catch-all. The only thing I had to say on the income part of it is, yes, I am a believer of things like UBI, Universal Basic Income, or even a reverse income tax, up to a certain point, to where if anything major happens and you are unable to work, you at least have something. But the encouragement is there to gain supplements to that work, or to that when you can and are able to work. Or if you use that to help propel getting the means to get you to work, that is absolutely fine. And that's why I say this is in at least some way towards some of that and towards fixing some things, but it's not necessarily the best way. And to kind of go back and touch on really two of your points. Number one, when you say about where to draw the line, fun fact, for Native American reservations, not across the board, I don't believe, but there are some. In order to be able to even live on that reservation, there's a limit. You have to be 1/16th that particular tribe. That same portion, 1/16th, is, now for those of you, I'm a huge rugby fan. I follow a lot of rugby. The New Zealand sort of B team, their second team, if you will, the Maori, you have to be 1/16th Maori at a minimum to be eligible for that team. Now, if you go back, now again, this just from a mathematical standpoint, and yes, things like cattle breeding are very much of a part of that. Weird correlation, I know. But just from a mathematical standpoint, if you're talking something with purebred, dilation, you go down to 1/16th. That's only 4 generations. So you're looking at roughly a century and a quarter. And that, if you were talking any cutoff point, that's the most common one. But naturally, that's going to be wiggled down. And I think having that common point is even tougher, because if you look at, and I know we keep alluding to our future education system episode and everything going on, just like we've had our stories that we're going to discuss in depth about that, there are even other stories that prominent universities that have been in the news, Georgetown, George Washington, even Harvard, who's been dealing with other different lawsuits from entirely different groups. It came out in their financial records. Oh, yeah, by the way, part of it to where we were able to found these universities is because of profit from the slave trade. Whoops. So it's, again, very, very muddy. And if there were going to be any sort of thing like this on a national scale, I would prefer something with the UBI or reverse income tax for everybody, regardless, because that's much easier to hammer out than it would be for reparations. Because if you're just getting into the nuts and bolts, these are conversations that would happen in mechanisms to be developed over years, just in a vacuum. And for the way our gubernatorial system works, it's very easy for years to turn into decades. And then you get to the point to where what would be the point?
Yeah, so with that, I mean, we could go back and forth on this. This is the this is the issue I have is we're and this is a huge thing that I have living in the state that I do, it's just going to be a yes no question we can expound on in a future episode. Is to receive government funding, should you be drug tested?
As weird and as partially controversial as this sounds, yes. But I will add caveats into that episode.
I fully agree with that. I think on some aspects that there should be limits on getting funding, governmental funding. I can understand, certain disabilities, stuff like that. Yes, I fully can go down that route. But I think to be able to receive any kind of government funding, you should be able to be subjected to a random drug test. You fail that drug test, you lose that funding. Just like if you work that has a drug policy, you fail a drug test, you're no longer employed.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, we'll touch on that in more in depth on a future episode. Um, and with that, since we're going to go on to our next topic, which is a scholarly topic, Mr. Watkins, I think that right now would be a good time to talk about Grammarly.com.
Well, I mean, if you're going and you have a scholarly piece of writing that you have, say a thesis, a term paper, any kind of big paper that you have to do, you're up endless days and nights studying and getting all of your research, and you want to make sure it's found just right. Well, with Grammarly, it goes way beyond just your simple spell check features with Word. You're talking all kinds of complex grammar issues, structuring, the tone of your paper, to make sure that everything is correct. Grammarly can help you with that. But say if you're not writing a term paper, saying if you're just sending an email to someone, be it checking in with a friend across town, setting something up, or if you have a loved one halfway across the world and you want to just say hello, let them know you miss them and you're thinking about them, Grammarly helps with those too. You don't have to worry about just the standalone app, which is wonderful on its own. You even have the Grammarly attachment for Chrome and other browsers that you can use as well. Very, very wonderful piece of software. You may be wondering, where can you get this software? Well, that's where we come in. If you go to getgrammarly.com/W2M network, you will get a free 30-day trial. All kinds of magnificent features. Everything under the sun. Whether you decide to like it, which most likely you will, then you can move forward. It all starts with you going to getgrammarly.com/W2M network.
Yeah, and always, make sure that you use that for any important email that you send out, such as resumes, interoffice interactions. Make sure that you present yourself the best way possible.
And
So,
even when you send your hate mail to s.garmer@gmail.com, you can use Grammarly to help make sure you're extra angry when you send it.
exactly. So, I'm going to let you start this conversation off, Erik. But Columbia University has came out and said that they're now going to have segregation graduations. I didn't know this was the 1960s anymore, and where you can now be classified to graduate based on your heritage, your skin tone, your financial status, religion, and such, which Columbia University has came out and said, yes, that this will happen. So with that, I'm going to let you take it away for a second.
Now, with this, it's come out that Columbia, as Jason mentioned, they're going to have your all-inclusive graduation ceremony along with different graduation ceremonies for certain students. Those were poor, and then you have those African American, Latinx, all those sorts. So as Columbia described it, as being in a more welcome and familiar sort of environment where you could better connect with your peers at this major time, your college graduation. I'm not going to lie, and I'm going to be extremely blunt about this. To me, it's fucking stupid. If the student did not ask to do all this, and the university president and all of the top brass took it upon themselves to do this, that is inherently wrong. The whole purpose of higher education and the collegiate experience is, as they have been touting for decades, the best years of your life. You go and you find yourself in your place in the world and get along and meet so many other people and such diversity away from your small town and yada, yada, yada. Number one, some of that, hate to break it to you, is a crock of shit, as we will discuss in a future episode. Nowadays, the purpose of college is for you to get into massive debt while getting a degree that's become increasingly worthless. And unless you're in specialized fields, you're basically going to be a paper or button pusher regardless of what you do. That's being known. But aside from that, why are you, after such a carefully constructed, masterfully repeated argument about college life, then decide to go, nah, you know what? Just forget all that. This is how it really should be. Now, if the students did make a petition and present this idea, yes, that would be an entirely separate conversation in which I would want to know what was going through the students' heads when they thought of this idea out of curiosity. I don't know. I wasn't a fly on the wall. And if I'm going to New York, it's not going to be to go to Columbia University. It's going to be for a whole bunch of different shenanigans like you would see on the HBO series The Deuce. Very wonderful show. Very sad when it ended. So, this is going backwards, not just it feels like temporally, ideologically. This feels like it's going backwards in so many different ways that it's like, are you saying that this is the way it should have always been? Are you saying that these last half century or more, that whole thing has been a lie? What are you really putting out there with this? Because somehow, how you slice it in a lot of ways, it's something I don't like.
Yeah, this is the problem I have. Like you said, college is supposed to be preparing you for life. And sorry, Cupcake, life doesn't cater to your needs. You get out into the real world, you don't get to pick and choose how you live life. The world dictates it for you. You don't get to say, well, I want an entry level job making $70K a year. You have to work your way up to make that $70K a year. And college is the best years of your life. I played college basketball for a year and a half. Was exposed to a lot of different cultures that I did not see living in a small town in West Virginia that was predominantly white. Hell, moving to Huntington, I was experienced even more diversity and culture shock living here. With the violence and stuff that I was not used to living, like I said. And when I went away to college, that wasn't there either. So coming here in one of the bigger metropolises of the state, was exposed to some stuff that I had never been exposed to. So yeah, I mean, life is about experiences. And if you limit your experiences, you're going to limit yourself further in life. You're going to have that expectation that when you get out to the real world, the world owes you something and you're special. You're not special. Nobody cares about your feelings. You need to nut up or shut up. Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this generation of participation trophies, which we can do a whole episode on, uh, is is a huge downfall, and I see it as a slap in the face for everything that the African community went through in the '60s. What Martin Luther King fought for, what is even Malcolm X. I mean, he had a radical approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
And people take bits and pieces of his radical approach and glorify it. They don't see the whole picture of what he was able to do for the black community as well, through his Nation of Islam teachings. And it's mind blowing that we have convinced a generation to segregate itself in order to demand equality.
And something like this is the entire oxymoronic mindset of it. To be split apart in order to come together, like making peace through preparing for war. And I'm glad that you touched on a couple of things, because number one, have you ever heard of the cafeteria effect?
I have not.
Okay, I've mentioned this a few times, but here's like a bit of a crash course. It's something that's discussed in sociology. If you go to a cafeteria and there is not a particular food available for you to sample, there's no way that you can necessarily gain the experience of sampling it, tasting that food. And that goes on to a broader stretch. If there is something that's denied, any kind of experience, mindset, whatever, that you are unable to be exposed to, then you go your entire however long without really knowing what that mindset is until you're finally exposed to it. And then that's when potentially, depending on the person, chaos can reign. So now you're taking away those samples that have been available and should be all this time. And really, for what purpose? What is that trying to achieve? And with everything else, you're absolutely right. Everyone is looking at now the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X in bits and pieces. MLK glorified and almost sanctified in a lot of ways with how everything he fought for he should be, because looking at all of his teachings, but completely ignoring at the time, even right after his assassination in '68, you take a survey, he was one of the most hated people on the planet. And it was the same with Malcolm X. Their teachings were the opposite ends of the spectrum, but they wanted to get the same results. That's where you have the infamous by any means necessary. Whereas King preached nonviolence, there were times where Malcolm X did preach violence. Sometimes you could get away with one, sometimes you needed the other. But in the end, they were both sides of the same coin. So you need to look at everything historically with all of them before you go falling all over yourselves one way or another. And people have a tendency to not do that either. So for all the people who say about, the holistic approach and looking at everything grand scheme, that's what you should be doing. That's what you haven't been doing with this generation. Because if you get them to look at everything in the grand scheme, what does that lead to? Thinking, processing. And what does that lead to? Critical thinking. And what does that lead to? An increased intelligence, which for the establishment, as you said and I agreed, is extremely dangerous. You take away that critical thinking, and you can get more people to do whatever you so choose.
And this goes back to the discussion of slavery earlier. The the plan was to not let the slaves gain an education, because the more they learned, the more they was able to think of their own and plan a way to escape.
Mm-hmm.
If you keep people dumb, they'll follow whatever you give them.
Of
It's like
course.
it's like the old saying. I can't remember what the movie it was. It says you need to treat people like mushrooms, feed them shit, and keep them in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly true. If you can, the world today, well, not the world, because it's not a global thing. The United States today is feeding a false narrative, creating the divide, and pushing that narrative to meet um, an overall means. It's like you see the fact that we're talking about segregation in 2021. That is mind blowing, and it's voluntary segregation, not forced, voluntary. Let that sink in. You have people that want equal rights, but want to be not included in the general population. You want to have your sex of people that get special attention and are treated differently. There's something truly fucked up about that. I mean, if you go back and you look at the civil rights movement, that's that's a vast difference. If you go back and look at the civil rights
I
movement,
would think so.
you know, I was thinking had a flashback of Denzel in Glory. Um, uh, Deep cut. Uh, but I mean, if you go back and you look at what people went through to fight for to fight against segregation, the ridicule, the beatings, the being being mauled by dogs, being having skin peeled off their body with fire hoses and water, and being defiant because they believed all men were created equal. To look at now and you see a country that says all men are created equal, but we don't want to be like everybody else. We want to only be like us, but we want everything everybody else gets. That's just fucked in the head. I think, and that's what I think everybody equals rights. I think you get equal rights as long as you get equal lefts. I mean, that's my opinion. I think I live by the golden rule. Don't be a dick. Treat everyone
Exactly.
treat everyone the same. Don't treat anybody differently, because you never know what impact you're going to have on that person's life. Two, what impact that person could have on your life. Three, somebody you don't know whatever somebody else is carrying. You don't know the burden someone else is carrying. A prime example. We're going to go divert a little bit, uh, just real quick. Robin Williams, one of the greatest comedians of our time,
Mm-hmm.
always joking, always laughing, committed suicide because of depression.
Yep.
Now you think of that, someone that brought joy to so many people had no joy in his life, to the point that he took his own life.
Mm-hmm.
That's some heavy shit to think about. So you don't know. I don't judge anybody's skin. I don't judge you. I judge you on how decent of a person are you. If you're all right with me, I'm cool with you. I don't care what skin tone you have. I don't care your sexual preference. I don't care who you're with. I don't care about any of that. Just if you treat me and mine with respect, you're going to get that respect in return. I feel that you match energies.
Oh
If you
yeah.
have if you have a negative energy, you're going to get negative energy.
Mm-hmm.
Not now, I'm not the most positive person, surprisingly, but I don't go out of my way to be a dick to people. Now, when I need to be a dick, I do, and I I'll shake it up a little bit. Hell, I might even shake it off. But there might even be a whole lot of shaking going on.
Hey, now come on. You know, you and I both are twinsies when it comes to that, okay? Let's just
Yes,
put that out there.
yeah. I mean, but when you come at me or you come at somebody close to me and you cross
Mm-hmm.
that line for me to be a dick, there's no gray area. It's pretty much black and white. I'm going to be an asshole. I'm going to make you want to wish that you didn't exist. I'm going to make you feel 3 inches tall because I am that quick-witted. I'm that much of an asshole.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I seen you in action. Me and you, we're pretty laid back. We don't get riled
Oh
up
yeah.
very often, but we get pushed to a point. All bets are off. That switch flips, and it's scorched earth time.
Oh yeah.
And go ahead.
I have always said I am like a volcano. You leave me alone, I'm minding my own business. Hey, it's a nice tourist destination. It's well known, historical, can take pictures, pretty cool, serene environment. But if you get to a point where everything builds up and builds up and builds up, I warn you, hey, you want to be cool, get out of the way. But if you keep pushing, you still decide to be around and ignore the warnings, and everything builds up, and you push to the point to where I erupt, yes, it's scorched earth. There's gonna be a lot of devastation. You're gonna be caught up in it if you're not careful. Now, do I erupt a lot? No. I try my best to keep myself in check because I know a lot of times there are certain things that happen. I get it. But if I keep saying, hey, this isn't right, you don't know what's going to happen next, and then it does, I got nothing for you. Nothing at all.
And yeah, I'm the same way. But it's just one of those things that you got to know what you never know what somebody else is going through, and you never know
Mm-hmm.
you being a dick to somebody can push them to a breaking point
Absolutely.
where it can lead to them making a rash decision because they feel worthless. And everybody has bad days. I get it. You nobody's rainbows and sunshine all the time. With that being said, you also don't know what a kind word can do to a stranger. You don't know how a kind gesture that person could be at the end of the rope, and you could
Mm-hmm.
the kind word that you offer, the the helping hand, the just a small gesture of saying hello and acknowledging their presence may be able to turn that day around, may be able to make them feel something. And that's the problem. Um, we are in a society where social interactions have went to the wayside. Everything is
Mm-hmm.
virtual, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's an issue too, because with the segregation, with the hatred, with the spewing hate, everybody's tough behind a keyboard. When I was growing up, you didn't have that. You talk shit, you got hit in the mouth. A lot of people are brave until they're confronted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Nowadays, a lot of people are brave behind a computer screen,
Of course.
and I think that goes into the whole thing, and that's a form of segregation as well, because you're taking a ideal, oppressing and opposing it onto someone, and suppressing them because you got the ability of being anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
or you have the idea of I'm hundreds of miles away. I can say what I want. I'm never going to see this person. So I can spew hate. I can spew rhetoric that makes absolutely no sense. Now, do I agree with violence under the right circumstances? If there's some aspects where an ass whipping is needed to get a point
Mm-hmm.
across. There's times where you can use diplomacy to get a point across.
Mm-hmm.
There's sometimes you just gotta throw hands. And but the problem with that is you got so many people that are so not balanced that you might whip somebody's ass and you have to worry about being charged with catching a charge for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was growing up, I was in a couple of fights. I gave my share of ass whippings. I took my share of ass whippings. But after it was over, 90% of the time, the issue was squashed.
Exactly.
It was
You went ahead, you hugged it out or whatever. You live to fight another day. It's
you
what
bought.
happens.
I mean, there was times that I was in a bar fight. I got my ass whipped. I bought the guy a beer. We sat down, drank a beer, hashed it out. We settled it like two men. Not so much anymore, man. Now
Mm-mm.
it's you have to have safe spaces. You have to have coloring books with kittens and bunnies, and you your feelings may get hurt. And it's crazy because, like I said, there's in my world, in my universe, the bubble that I live in, there's no need for hate. There, I don't tolerate it. Yeah, you can be an asshole. That's fine. But if it comes down to it, don't write checks your ass can't cash. So with that, it calms me down when I do be getting that asshole.
Well, what happens? What do you go when you simmer after your eruptions?
I usually sit down, turn on my favorite playlist on Amazon Music, may look into the W2M network, or listen to my favorite Religion Broadcasting Network shows such as Long Road to Ruin, On Trial, Metal Hammer of Doom. Uh, yeah, I can't think of the other one. I was just on it the other day.
Damn you,
Can't,
Hollywood!
yeah, damn you, Hollywood. I was just on it. I was just on it the other day covering the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. Or you could find wonderful shows like such as The Kickoff, the backlog of Black Irish. And I'm going to let everybody in on a little secret. There's going to be some really old footage appearing on the W2M network in the foreseeable future. So
Hmm.
you can actually listen to my start in podcasting and some long, long visited shows when I hosted my own football podcast from the cheap seats. And boy, let me tell you,
Interesting.
it was fun.
Well, at least you didn't have to work in with any sort of chair or anything like in my past. But we won't even talk about that. And lest we forget, there's a lot of other shows that we aren't involved with, like the awesomeness that is Chapter Select. our boy Randy Isbell, who also has the R&R Sports Report, which in the coming months you may or may not hear a certain voice right now be more involved with. Stay tuned for that one. And you may or may not hear Randy get into a few other things that are in the works as we speak. So, you're not the only one with some deep teases there, Jason Teasley.
Well, I only tease as deep as they'll let me, and judging by my hand size, it's about three and a quarter inch. But anyway, yeah, definitely look up any of your. It doesn't have to be W2M. You can look up any of your favorite playlists, favorite podcasts, anything on AmazonMusic.com. You can say even use your smart devices that I have 15,000 up, and say, Alexa, play W2M Network. WTM from TuneIn. Which my Alexa just tried to play.
Yay! You see, Alexa knows that. And for W2M, it'll play the most recent podcast that's up there. But just like with Grammarly, we gotta tell the folks how they can get on Amazon Music themselves, so that way they can do the same thing.
Yeah, just go to Amazon. Is it AmazonMusic.com/W2M?
GetAmazonMusic.com/W2M network.
See, this is what happened when Sean doesn't send me the ad reads. They go, they go off the rails, and I forget shit. But but yeah, I mean, it's great for, I'm going to be using it while I'm cutting grass this week before my yard gets installed, and I can devise a playlist, link it to my favorite Alexa device, and boom, off I go with my lovely playlist as I sweat my balls off doing manual labor.
Well, I mean, for something playlists, audio books, where you're doing manual labor, or you just happen to have a horrific commute, because that's going to be a thing again soon. Amazon Music, it's definitely the way to go. And again, get AmazonMusic.com/W2M network. That'll get you rolling with a great offer from all of us here at the network. So, yeah, you're welcome.
And with that being said, we wrap everything up with topics that you brought to my attention, Erik, since one of them is from your home state. And with the Deep South legislation that you wanted to discuss tonight. So I'm turning the reins over to you, and you have control of the show.
All right. And I'm going to flat out say that some of these I've seen coming. And I am going to get political because, hey, this is legislation. For everybody that talked about the wave of voting bills that have been passed or that are setting up to come all throughout the country, even the ones like Iowa, who I don't understand why, but they decided that somehow things didn't go the right way, so they're doing things like limiting early voting and actually closing polls an hour earlier on election day. But that wasn't my only curiosity. Because my main ones are coming out of from where I'm at, Florida, and the neighboring Georgia, which I may or may not be planning to visit for my third iteration of my birthday trip. Yes, things have been happening behind the scenes. So up in Georgia, there is an incredible sweeping Voting Rights Act. I am not the biggest fan of, to say the very least. Restricting access, voter ID laws, that's an entire issue. But limiting early voting, in essence, almost eliminating early voting on Sundays, for anybody who's a fan and who really benefits from Souls to the Polls, they're looking at you. And all these other different measures to basically restrict what was a given right, at least theoretically, in our Constitution from the get-go. Is this quite like Jason alluded to post-Civil War, where you have, being arrested at polling stations and the creation of poll taxes? Not entirely, even though if you looked at Amendment 4 in Florida, to where those nonviolent offenders who had served their time were granted the right to vote by a referendum that passed overwhelmingly, but then tweaked, in quotation marks, to say, oh no, you've got to pay your fines first, essentially creating a poll tax. So you have these things going on currently in Georgia, to where even a state senator was arrested, knocking on the door of the governor's office to try to be in the room as the final touches were going on, and as Governor Kemp was, I believe, signing the bill. I may be wrong on that particular aspect. But you have this massive thing going on in Georgia as far as voting rights. Now, for everything that's gone on in Atlanta and in Georgia as a state the past few months, this is a major issue because, and I'm going to say this is very significantly targeted. Because unlike Iowa, a lot of people in Georgia, it didn't go the way certain people wanted to. So now they're trying to fix this. And that's got my curiosity. Then heading back into my home state, yes, our governor is very, very suspect at a bare minimum. Trends on Twitter, billboards, and I'm going to say rightfully so. I get it. Well, turning things up to 11 with HB1. What is HB1, you ask? It is described as the anti-riot bill. Now, I knew at the beginnings of it to where, yes, if you're protesting in certain places, if you're in traffic, you can be run over in essence by a car. The person driving that car would have no liability whatsoever. Now, am I entirely for protesting in traffic all the time? No, I'm not. Because, yes, that's an inherent risk. It is a good way to get your point across. But understand there's a safety issue. I get that. But HB1 doesn't necessarily stop there. It, in some cases, gives cops total authority to do whatever. Arrest, essentially beat, especially with everything with body cameras, which in many counties here in Florida, they're not a thing. They would have free reign even if you're near a protest. You don't even have to be directly involved. You could even be against what is being protested. But if you're nearby, a cop could look at you and say, you're protesting, you're coming with us. And it also defines as what happens and what would consider the protest that's under this law. It could be as few as 9 people protesting in the street. That would count. And if it so happens that there's $5,000 in damage done, which, if you know anything about insurance and property values and stuff, you can easily create that magic number in half a heartbeat. This would also kick in as well. And I'm just sitting and wondering to myself, people are already pissed off. People are already acting a fool. People are already doing things because they're sick and tired. They've got nothing to lose. And what little they have left is being taken away. So now you're resorting to doing this to try to get what you in particular want. That makes me wonder why. Why are you pushing so hard for this when you see a lot of people, in almost every case, rightfully so, acting in a certain way, a lot of times with that way peacefully, because they're pissed off at the state of things? For all the times that I have mentioned things like my issues with the government and the fact that people don't realize the true meaning of fascism when they spot it about, and that we're actually under a lot of fascist concepts in this country, now you're going ahead and you're doing this. And for all the people that protested under the guise of you're impinging upon my rights, I want to know, where are you going to be now? Are you going to be part of the people? Because in some of these cases and in some states, your rights are going to be impinged too. These are some things, even with this voting bill in Georgia, this is going to affect every single person. Where are all these people going to be in stepping up when they're first to claim my rights, my rights? You don't want to think about it, but it's your rights too. Answer me that. And now I'm going to turn my soapbox into something else. Jason?
I have mixed feelings.
Okay.
The Florida thing, good concept, poor execution. I think that people should be held accountable if property damage is done. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because
Absolutely.
but also freedom of speech, everything like that. I don't think that should be impeded upon. I think you should have the right to assemble and protest, but once that protest gets out of hand, which this is a slippery slope going preference that
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see a narrative. You see political agendas manifest within peaceful protests. Um, Most notably, I've seen a lot of peaceful protests that have been infiltrated by bad apples. We'll just say that we'll not make any kind of affiliation, where you get that riles the crowd up, gets the mob mentality going, and then they force a narrative on either side. Um, you could have, let's take the, well, fuck it, let's go off the rails. Let's go head first. The George Floyd thing
Mm-hmm.
that we're seeing. What
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing, a lot of protests.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think he should have lost his life? No. Do I think that? Do I think the whole story came out? No. I think this goes back to my whole thing: three sides every story. Do I think information was withheld? Yes. Um, do I think the circumstances, how everything went down, were really fucking sketchy? Yes. A lot of the protests, I'm gonna go 50-50, because you you don't really see the peaceful protests on the news. You see the violence. Um, and this is where I have the issue with protesting, and this is where I take my stand. And come at me, bro. Um, you create damage, you're responsible. You don't get federal funding to rebuild a city that you destroyed. Just plain and simple. If and you see this, and I'm going to make a fucked up correlation, and I'm sure it's going to get very, very twisted with what I have to say. So make sure you take everything I say in context. Um, you see cities get burned over sports championships.
Mm-hmm.
I see that as the same thing that happened in Baltimore. See the same thing that happened in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you should get federal funding. The store owners that had the damages done, yes, I think that they should get funding. But if you was out there and you created any kind of, took action in anything, I don't care what it was, you're responsible. Accountability's big. The George Floyd Memorial thing is a fucking war zone right now. People are being shot.
I was hearing about that. Yeah.
People are being shot paying respect to a lost life. They've taken the death of someone and turned it into a vigilante cause. I'm sorry, you're not fucking Batman. You're not. I'm pretty sure. I hate to make light of it, but that's it. You have ultra violence going on across this nation. You had the place up in Portland. Hell, I think it still exists, where they decided that they're no longer part of the United States. They're a sovereign nation and all this. Cool. Guess what? All your electricity cut off. All your cell towers cut off. You want to pay for it? You pay international charges. Go fuck yourself. My feelings, don't at me. Go fuck yourself if you disagree with me. That's how I am. If you want to take stuff that far, be treated like that. You want some deliveries, no longer there. You don't get basic supplies coming to your area. If that's the way you want to do it, show people don't understand. And this goes back to my whole fucking thing about this generation, because people are not understanding that actions have consequences. And I'm saying this as a person that, I fucked up in life. I've dealt with shit. But you got to look at things that's at face value. Yes, do I think rioting should be illegal? Protesting should be legal. But a powder keg, you get mob mentality, a protest can turn to a riot in a blink of an eye.
Absolutely.
And that's the problem. And it could be no fault of anybody that was peacefully protesting.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, you with the age of social media, you can dictate a narrative very easily. You could have people paid, which this is a known fact, that there was peaceful protests, and magically pallets upon pallets of bricks and everything just randomly would show up the day before.
Of course, I've seen those.
The day before the scheduled protest was supposed to occur, you would just see these random pallets or random U-Hauls full of shit show up, but nobody knew why, and everybody knew where these locations were, and everybody documented them, and you see people, and you have that, and that goes back to the old saying, one bad apple could spoil a bunch.
Completely agree.
And I think that that's what's happened with this. People have become so uninformed and become blind sheep following a narrative that they're so adamant against that, and they've not been educated on, and they follow blindly, that they have become the bad apples that go in and infiltrate a peaceful thing and to turn it into pure chaos.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad you brought a lot of that up, because I wanted to touch on a few things that you mentioned there. With all of these autonomous zones, Seattle, that was a failure. Reading what's going on in Minneapolis, where they covered both sides of the argument, that's also a bit of a failure. Because even though you have the side to say, oh, this violence is going on everywhere in a lot of these different places, but you're reporting it here because it's police free. Okay, fine. You still have these same levels of violence reported in a lot of places where there are police. I can go to stories about Baltimore, Chicago, all these other ones, New York, wherever. There's a spike in violence, even with police, it's going to be reported. Or at least if it isn't, it should be. So with all of these people that, oh, you're not treating yourself like you're a member of the United States and this and that, fine by me. Like Jason said, bye. Or if you want to stay here, then have the international expense. And I'm also throwing it out to you, all of you sovereign citizens. Yes, if you're going to use your historical facts and all these amendments, okay, so then if you're not paying taxes and stuff, fine. All of you need visas then. All of you. And if you don't want to get a visa from this government and you're seeing all of this backlog and everything else, leave. You're not a citizen. You don't consider yourself a citizen. Go to whatever country. We won't care. We don't have to, if that's the attitude you're taking. And going back to with what you were saying with the pallets of bricks and the U-Hauls, one thing that I noted that I saw covered maybe twice on different local media in here in the US. This is why I lean more heavily towards international media 90% of the time for my news sources. With a lot of the arrests that were made, those people were from outside of where those protests and riots happened. Like you mentioned in Minneapolis. A lot of the arrests, not all, but like 80, 90% ish, those people were not from Minneapolis. So, leading to your theory, which I completely agree, you have nothing to do with this. The people who are there are protesting peacefully, but because it would only be covered on the news for a day or two, you come in for whatever reason and you start shit. And what happens? Weeks on end, they talk about all of the riots and stuff, which I don't like. For all the people, and I do see the legitimate credence about buildings and social contracts and all of that stuff. I get it, and I would understand a lot of it. But even so, if you want to work to change that in a diplomatic way, that's fine. And then if you hit a wall with that diplomacy, then you try other means. But if you're just going there because you want to go and tear up shit and do things, no, not a big fan of that. You go and do damage. Now again, and this goes back to the media reporting as well, gotta be across the board. So if you're also going to insist, and I'm sure you agree with me on this, for all these people who were actually doing the rioting and causing the damage to be held accountable, that's for everybody, regardless of what. Because I saw a little bit of damage done to a certain church in Washington, D.C., taking down signs and stuff, and all that was set up peacefully. People that came in had nothing to do with it and were doing all kinds of shit, but somehow they weren't magically touched, when they too should have been held accountable for their destructive actions. So yeah, do it to everybody. Everybody.
And I agree
won't
with
have a
it.
problem.
I think it needs to be across the board, full
Mm-hmm.
transparency, but you'll never
Mm-hmm.
get that. Uh,
No.
and it goes back to the whole discussion of division, because you always have a narrative that needs to be met to cause the division. And like I said, we can go on and on about this, but uh, the Florida thing, I think it's a good idea. I think it needs tweaked to have a better, um, I guess you could say, better construct to how it's upheld and presented. I think some of the things about it, like the whole, if you're X amount away, given the police full authority, uh, I think that's setting that's going to be a very bad instance. And it's gonna create worse. But because the issue I see, and this is an oxymoron again, you've seen all summer to defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're seeing anytime that something happens, they want police present. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. I'm sorry, Cupcake.
Yeah.
Pick a side.
Now,
Either.
and just to interject real quickly with that, if you're gonna say defund the police, know actually what that means. Because I am a person that says, do they need to be disbanded? No, we need a police force. Does some restructuring and reallocation of funds need to take place? Yes, because I think the police have become way too much of a catch-all when they are always not needed. I want them there when they're needed, but if you can handle it without police, and in some situations you can, you should. Continue.
Well, I mean, to touch on that, as a former first responder myself, as an EMT, there's multiple situations where we rolled up and or in conversation, police officers wasn't needed, but they was dispatched,
Right.
um, which is taking resources away. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is another thing. Do I think that more training needs to happen? Yes. I
Mm-hmm.
you can never know too much. I think the requirements need to be a little stringent? Yes, I can say that. Um, but it's just craziness. The Georgia thing, I really don't have much to say on. I mean, I'm kind of indifferent on. It's going to have a huge impact. Um, but that's something. I'm one of those types of people that I believe that you should have a valid ID in order to vote.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a firm believer that you have to have a license to operate a vehicle. You have to have a license to hunt, fish, everything else. Why should you not have to be able to present an ID to help shape the future of the country you live in this
Yeah.
democracy? So I fully support needing documentation of some sort of an ID. Absentee ballot, I think that's a slippery slope that we learned that is a failure this year, with all the inconsistencies and all the randomness and magical errors that occurred in key component states and key cities. That um, with absentee ballots, I think mail-in voting is fucking ridiculous, unless given a legitimate reason. And I'm sorry if you hide behind the whole COVID thing. If it's good enough for you to go to Walmart, that's the thing. I mean, uh, that's just my opinion. If you can go out and do your grocery shopping, you can go out and vote. That's just as simple as it gets. And we can't talk much on our opinions on there, or we'll get another strike, and Sean will get mad at us. But yeah, I mean, I think that the whole voting thing needs to be. I think there needs to be a guideline for it and executed well. You'll never
Mm-hmm.
you'll never get it because you'll never come to it. You'll never have a government that agrees on it,
No,
and
and
that's
that
the
is
problem.
something that is so critical. A lot of investment can and should be done in voting infrastructure. Now, I have slightly different views on absentee voting, but again, not wanting to piss off a lot of beeps and boops with the YouTube algorithms, I'll leave it at that. But at the same time, yes. Should this be a priority? And in some cases, is it a priority? Yes. But will we ever get a government to fully agree and go headfirst, full throat into that? No. So in the end, everybody's just going to get blue balls in that case.
Yeah, and you're going to waste taxpayer money arguing, and you're never going to have a cohesive agreement.
Mm-mm.
Because as long as there's some room for error, you're going to have room for blame. I guess that's a good way to
Mm-hmm.
put it.
Yeah.
But
Blame and
but
exploitation.
but with that being said, I mean we could go on and on about this. I don't want to go down any more rabbit holes. So we're going to wrap up and this episode and put a bookmark in it for future conversations that I'm sure we will have. Um, so Erik, where can everybody locate you?
You can find me on Twitter at SquidSportsHead. Baseball's going to be coming up. I have a whole big adventure with my fantasy baseball team that I'm trying to sort out before opening day. But since that's coming, odds are you'll see me live tweeting some games. And if FS1 and FS2 will get off their ass and finally agree to an Aussie rules deal, those of you who have heard my kind of putting in on the R&R Sports Report, Randy Isbell, Robert Hagan, Tuesdays, 9 to 11 Eastern, just saying. KLCZ.com, also just saying. You'll see me be able to live tweet some of those games too on there. But if you're not interested for live tweeting and you want other conversations or other in-depth stuff for Flame Wars, you can find me on Facebook. Look up Erik Watkins, guy in the recliner holding wine. You know what to do. But if you're looking for something extra spicy, slide into my DMs on Twitter, undergo the proper vetting process. You'll get access to my dark Twitter, Snapchat, OnlyFans, Telegram, couple of extra things. And let's just say, remember you said last week, Jason, you wish you didn't know and didn't see certain things involving me in that realm? I play my cards right over the next couple of months. There could be more things that you probably won't want to see. So stay tuned.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. As always, you can always find me on Twitter under W2M Chairman. That's pretty much the best place to find me. s.garmer@gmail.com is where you send all the hate mail. Even if you want to just drop by and tell Sean to go fuck himself, you're more than happy to do so. I highly encourage it, actually. Uh, bring a little spice to his life. You know, make him feel like he's important. Because I know that I know that you know he's been out fishing lately, and you know he's been fishing for compliments lately. So definitely drop by s.garmer.com. Tell him to go fuck himself. Compliments to Jason. Um, I'm sure it'll make his day. With that being said, Erik, any last words?
Do your homework. Don't forget to be awesome. And always support your local accountants.
Exactly. With that, you guys have a nice week. We'll see you on the next Black Irish episode.